This is Carissa Poroko, and you all just heard Michelle Weber. We are your hostesses today for our webinar on developing a successful success story for the media. Michelle and I are both PR media relations experts. We've been working for over 15 years in media relations. We are with Tricom Chicago. Tricom Associates has been working on National Public Lands Day for several years now, and we've been a part of that team. So it's our pleasure to join all of you today and kind of walk you through developing a tool that is very important in doing media relations. And we hope that it helps all of you, and it will help us as the PR team that's out there pitching National Public Lands Day. A success story is one of your most important tools in the toolbox when you're approaching media. So thanks for joining us and helping us help you gain more media attention, because that's what will ultimately come of this. And I think, Michelle, we wanted to kind of take a quick poll quickly in the beginning here. If you all can chat into the chat box, just kind of a high, medium, or low, if you would rate your experience level working with the media and specifically using success stories, a personal story from one of your volunteers to gain media attention.
If during this call you are having trouble chatting, and obviously you wouldn't otherwise be able to let us know because we got you on mute, Anna gave her email address, and just send her a quick email and we'll try to help you. So we'll continue on. I see one person already responded in the chat. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Mary. This is just going to help us gauge how quickly to move through this material. Throughout the entire presentation, please use the chat to propose questions, or if you're wondering something. And then after we finish, we'll of course give you our contact information so that as you think about what success stories you have, you can ask us, does it have the elements of a good success story that the media might be interested in? Obviously, all of you have your own success stories that you feel good about, but the media is very picky, and they have certain criteria that you need to meet in order to get coverage of the efforts that you're doing. So I think I'll get to the next slide, and we'll continue.
So this is what we hope to cover, and then some today. We will kind of go through questions at the end, and we will also walk you through some examples we have for you of success stories, some of which are from National Public Lands Day volunteers, and one is just an example of how we have turned a personal story into a media opportunity for another client. And so, really just to kind of go through this, how to pinpoint a media success story, that's what we're going to walk through today. The first thing to remember is that there is a difference, in just a success story and a media success story, because although a lot of the stories that you have may be good, they may not have the elements to kind of gain the media's attention. And the reason that success stories are important is because, as you know, I'm sure from watching your local news, if you pick up any newspaper or even magazine, really when you see the way reporters cover stories, they typically start with a human interest example. It's from someone's perspective on, even, it could be anything under the sun, whether it's a health-related story. They start with somebody who is sick with whatever issue the story is covering, or if it's, an example of a program that's helping people, they start with a success story on how that program is playing out in the community. For National Public Lands Day, typically what media might do would be kind of from the volunteer's perspective or from someone's perspective who is at the park, and really kind of the difference that they may notice. Some in our kind of culling through the success stories that have been submitted by all of your organizations, one thing that caught my eye was a personal account by a runner who was going through the park and who said, it's such a breath of fresh air to actually be able to run through a park and not be distracted by all the trash, because the volunteers had been there and they had cleaned up the park, and you can enjoy the park without looking at all of the the eyesores that are typically there. And that's kind of an example of someone's unique perspective. And readers or viewers watching television, reading the newspaper or the magazine, or listening on the radio, they can relate to those human interest stories and those personal perspectives. And that's exactly why reporters like to use them, and oftentimes they start out their stories that way. So what we're going to go through today is how to turn your stories into these human interest stories that can be given to media and help your organization get media attention. And as I said before, we'll go through specific examples, just to kind of pick the story apart and show you the different elements that are there that media will be looking for. Okay, so here's a run through of kind of the basics for what a good media success story has. That human interest angle, so how it's affecting, how whatever program you're talking about, and in this case let's talk about National Public Lands Day. How is that affecting someone going to the park or a volunteer participating in an event? What is that person's personal story? So what does that person have going on in his or her life that might be unique? For example, if you have a volunteer who's been doing National Public Lands Day for a number of years, just the fact that they have been committed to doing this for however many years. We have some that have been doing it for as long as the program has been around, so 20 years. That in itself is interesting because that person has been doing something for such a long time, and there's kind of a side story to that. And sometimes that side story interests the reporter just as much, if not more, than the fact that the initiative is even taking place. And that's kind of one of the tricks of the trade when you're a PR person and you're trying to gain a reporter's interest in your initiative. Sometimes it's more effective to kind of approach them with the side story and then wrap your organization and your initiative into that, instead of kind of coming straight at them with, this is the initiative, this is the event that's happening, et cetera, because oftentimes, they can't see the side story when you do it that way. And if you start with the side story, the other kind of facts of your initiative about the who, what, when, and where, they easily fold in. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I wanted to interject with an example that I think might help everyone further understand. There is a Boy Scout who last year participated and previous years participated, and for a variety of reasons he realized, hey, someone who is wheelchair bound can't really participate easily in National Public Lands Day, at least in his area. And he connected with a park director and said, let's build some planter boxes that are at a good level where someone who is in a wheelchair can kind of wheel right up and actually participate. That's a great example of, he just had a personal interest, curiosity, doesn't really matter, but it's those kinds of initiatives. Like he saw a need, he took care of fixing a problem, a barrier to participation, and that's an example that we're going to be using in the media this year.
That's a great example, Michelle, and it ties in with what's next on this list, local angle. The angle of the story is kind of how the reporter might categorize it. And if you're talking about a boy, who's a cub and he's, doing a National Public Lands Day initiative, that obviously kind of fits into the youth category, and a reporter who covers youth may cover that. But if you give that side story about, how he saw the need to make it wheelchair accessible, that opens it up to a whole new angle, which, there are certain reporters that cover programs for the disabled. So that gives you kind of another angle to approach the reporter with, and it may give you a whole other reporter who could be interested. It's another section of the paper, for example. So it's kind of really just strengthening your story when you're including these side stories and these personal human interest stories. Moving down the list, the actual person, so in this case I'll just keep going with the cub, the boy, he makes a big difference in your success level, because if you've got a good story, that's the first step. But what you need to have along with the story is access to the actual individual that you're talking about. So this boy, this cub, may or may not be accessible. He may be in school all day and not easy to reach, or he may be easy to reach via email in school or after school. And that makes a big difference, because reporters aren't always the most flexible. I mean, they do try to be flexible with your kind of schedule conflicts, but if your spokesperson is not accessible when you need them to be either emailing with or talking to a reporter or meeting in person with a reporter, then you may want to move on and try to find a story about a subject who is more accessible. All of these things kind of make up the media ability. This is our little made-up term to kind of rate a success story and talk about whether or not it's media friendly. Accessibility, the local angle, the human interest story. Here on this list, you see visual and the sound and the content. Those are the things that kind of translate into the media story. So if you're talking about a television story, you really need to have visuals for the reporter. So you need to explain to the reporter that they would see either video or photos of this volunteer doing, the work that you're describing. If it's radio, then they really need to have the sound, and this can happen kind of, as they're covering the story. If they come out to the event, they can capture the sound with their recorder, and that's oftentimes what radio reporters do. They come out, they interview your subjects, and they capture the sound, but it's your job to describe that sound so that they can kind of easily imagine the story. That's part of a successful pitch, is to kind of say, you would get the sounds of someone crunching as they're walking on a path that has trash on it, or the volunteers, the group of volunteers kind of talking with each other at the beginning of the day, et cetera, et cetera. So, to give the reporter a very good description of the visual and the sound, or some of the content, kind of, background information, background documents for a print reporter, stuff that they can use to pull content from. That's another really good thing to give reporters. A timely news hook, of course, is kind of a hook to tie this to, and we'll get into this a little later through one of our examples. But what's happening around National Public Lands Day? It's typically the fall. It's the end of the summer travel season. It might be a good opportunity for families to go out and have a weekend travel, a road trip to a National Public Lands Day event that they can kind of squeeze in at the end of the year after school has already started. That's kind of a timely news hook, a way that you can kind of peg this into the calendar that reporters are following, which is, in the fall, that's kind of what they're thinking about, back to school, end of the summer travel season, et cetera. By specific audience, I am really referring to what I was talking about earlier. When you have the Cub example, you have the youth audience, or you might have the disabled audience. You may have volunteers who are seniors, so you have the elderly audience. You may have athletic groups that are out there and they're volunteering, so you have kind of the fitness audience. You may have women's groups or families that go out together. Those are all specific audiences that are covered by reporters who focus only on that audience. So it's really good to kind of pick that out in the beginning. And then, of course, you want to make sure your organization fits into the story. It's easy to kind of get lost sometimes in the mix because you've got all these other pieces that you're fitting in. So you really want to make sure there's a strong tie-in because either you're the organizer or it's taking place at your actual location, or the spokesperson is a part of your organization, a part of your group, and will then tie you in by talking about it. That's something you really want to drive home with your spokesperson.
So I want to just interject very quickly. So if you think about your audience and you have your success story, and I'll go back to the Boy Scout creating wheelchair accessible activities. News reporters, let's take print because they still more or less slice and dice beats, not as much as they used to. But you've got a reporter that covers family. You have a reporter that covers seniors, for example. You can actually go to both reporters with a different angle to the story. So as you think about your success stories, it's kind of like a graphic organizer of sorts, where your story is in the middle, and you might have like a web and lines that go out from the center. You have the feature reporter, you have the family and parenting reporter, you've got the seniors reporter. And just because you get a no from one reporter doesn't mean that's a no from the entire paper. So as you think about your success stories, try to slice and dice the story and give yourself as many opportunities to pitch the story to one media outlet. TV and radio is a little different, but still, TV has different news shows at different times of the day. Morning tends to be more news-driven. Midday, a little more fluffy, if you will. And I think that's enough on that. Thank you.
Next
Chris,
slide, Michelle.
Go ahead? Uh-huh.
Yeah, can you bump to the next slide? Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. So the human interest angle is, it really all starts with that personal story. Sticking with the Cub Scout example, what is his story? It's not enough to just say there's a boy, he's a Cub Scout, and he had this great idea. Let's really talk to him and interview him, if you will. We do this all the time as the communications staff. We interview the subjects like a reporter would. Let's kind of get into his history a little bit. How long has he been doing this? Does he have any personal experience with someone who's disabled? What made him think about doing the project this way? What is his goal? Kind of asking him questions that really pull out his personal story, because a lot of those details can kind of interest the reporter in, like I said, in the boy, and then they wrap your initiative and your program around him. And you just may not know what you're actually going to discover, when you do start to interview someone, and they may not know until you really start talking about, their own personal history and experiences. So it's always a good idea to start that way. And what you're hoping for is this heartwarming story that comes out of it, and that's what reporters are always looking for. They're always looking for something that is moving, either happy or sad. It really will help them if you can give them that up front, because they know then that they're able to interest their audiences. You're looking for something that grasps attention, something that's unique, something that stands out. And then, of course, real examples, so you're not just talking about your initiative kind of in a very general way, but you're giving specific examples, so you're really kind of spelling out that story, that intricate story that's the human interest part of the news article. So subjects that work. Part of a specific audience, so really if you can kind of pick out the different audiences that your subject might appeal to, and it might just be one. There are probably some unique examples that, might be an athlete who's also a senior citizen, for example. So you might be able to go to two different reporters on that. And then the story itself has, multiple audiences, as we've been giving you examples. But if you can really sort of pinpoint what audience your specific volunteer would appeal to, that then is really the first step to trying to figure out what kind of reporter to pitch your story to. Again, can't say it enough, accessible and willing to work with the media and with you as the communications staff person. It doesn't help to have the most amazing, tear-jerking story that you can imagine if your volunteer, your subject, doesn't give you the time of day, doesn't call you back, doesn't return emails, because you can bet if they're not responsive to you, they're not going to be responsive to reporters, and that's then a problem because media, they don't wait around. They may try twice, but they're not going to try a whole lot more than that, and so it's really kind of important that your subject is willing and ready to kind of communicate at any given moment. Available, are they in school all day? Are they a teacher? Do they have a job that might let them step away and take a cell phone call? Do they have internet at home? Those are the kinds of things you may want to ask. There may be volunteers who don't have internet at home, and I've been talking to volunteers who prefer to be either called or snail mailed, and that's fine. As long as you know up front how to reach that person and what the best way to reach them is, you can work that out. But it is important that they're reachable. Articulate is really another important trait you want to look for. When your volunteer is kind of telling you his or her story, how do they describe it? Do they speak clearly? Do they kind of get to the point, or do they ramble? Those are the things to look out for, because if they do speak clearly and they get right to the point, then you can be sure they'll probably do that with a reporter. If they do not, then you can definitely try to coach them on that. It's definitely workable, and you can always improve. So definitely take a look at how they're describing their story to you, and then take a step back and think through, do I need to coach this person before putting them on the phone or, in front of a reporter? And then, of course, the local tie. This, again, is, local in terms of the market where you live, the city where you live, and the newspaper or radio station or television station that covers your organization. They're going to want someone who lives pretty close. Oftentimes you can find people that might travel 45 minutes to an hour to get to one of your volunteer days. However, a media person may not like that so much because they may have their own newspapers and radio stations and television stations in whatever city they're traveling from. So you really want to try to find someone who's close in proximity and, again, who has a tie-in to your organization. It's very important. As I just said, strong tie-in to your organization, that's going to spell success, because you really don't want your organization to get lost in the kind of the weaving of the story. You're going to talk about the person's history, about the person's human interest story, their personal experiences, and how does all of that tie into your organization? Did your organization help him or her, come up with the idea to volunteer in whatever way, whatever unique way that you're describing? Was your organization a part of that, and how was your organization a part of that? That is really something you want to be so much weaved into the story that it could not get lost. Mediability, again, don't ignore all of the things that we're going over. Just because you have a good story, if you're missing one of these major elements, it just may not work. And again, that local angle is going to be something that the reporter is insistent on, and oftentimes they won't even listen to a pitch if it's not local enough. We hear it all the time. Great story, but not local enough for us. We find it more so with the smaller community papers because they're really neighborhood based. You have to be so local even to the neighborhood. And then the bigger daily newspapers obviously have a little bit larger circulation, and you can have people from the surrounding areas. And I would say the same for TV and radio. But definitely kind of ask the reporter, we do this a lot too, what areas do you cover? What neighborhoods do you cover? Is this local enough for you? You can ask them up front.
And then if they give you a response and the success story you have in mind or the person you have in mind doesn't live within that coverage area, don't be so quick to say thank you and hang up. Give it some thought. Say thank you to the reporter. I'm going to get back to you, and see if you can find someone else that lives in the coverage area and don't lose the opportunity. Also, I know Carissa's mentioned several times about coaching spokespeople, coaching the person who has the success story. You can tell them, please use this sentence in the interview, and you can give them a line that talks about your organization and National Public Lands Day and how important that is to your area. So don't be shy about giving that directive. You can also ask the reporter, say, this spokesperson has this story, but I want to ask if you'll make mention of our park, of National Public Lands Day. You can be absolutely upfront.
Going back to what Michelle said about when the reporter says it's not local enough, finding someone who is from that area is a great idea. You can also ask that reporter what newspaper covers the area where this person is from, because they often know. Sometimes they're part of the same publishing group, and it may be a group of small papers that one publisher owns. And so they'll oftentimes say to you, nope, you don't want our paper, you want X paper. And that can be really helpful. So don't be afraid to ask that as well. Moving on, just to go over what makes it the mediability of a story. Again, you've got the visual for TV and the sound for radio. You've got the content, so the background information, the press release. That can be especially useful for print and online media. Photos and video are extremely important for both broadcast and print. Oftentimes a photo will help your print story, because if there is a great photo, and we know there's a plethora of amazingly beautiful National Public Lands Day photos, if there's a good photo to accompany your story in the newspaper, oftentimes the reporter will find more space for the story. So instead of it being one column on the left, it might end up being front page, front and center, just because you have an amazing photo to go with it. So even if a reporter does not ask for the photo, tell them you've got it and send it to them. It doesn't hurt. And access to those subjects and all of these tools is going to be really important to a reporter. Your job is to make the reporter's job easier. if you can't get a hold of your spokesperson, they're not going to want to fight to get a hold of your spokesperson. So, if you can help them by kind of saying to them, I'll send you the photos, or I will send you the video, or I'll set up the interview so that you don't have to kind of go back and forth and do the scheduling with the spokesperson. If you can do the legwork for the reporter, it's going to make his or her job easier, and it's going to make you more successful. So National Public Lands Day and the communications team have a number of tools that they make accessible to help support your organization and your media opportunities. And on the website, the calendar and the map that you can direct reporters to kind of pull up other local events in your area. That's a great example. You can kind of fit your organization into the bigger picture and your event into the bigger picture when you talk about the fact that this is happening all over the country, that there are hundreds of thousands of volunteers. It's not just in your local area, but it's part of a national event. The photos on the website and the background content on the website, all of those tools will help support you, and they're there for you. The big picture examples of successful projects at work, again, the website has a lot of those, and we are going to go through a couple with you today just to kind of show you how some of these examples that we've been given by site managers can be turned into media opportunities. I think we could take a second just to see if anyone has questions first before we go through those examples. Is there any questions right now?
Want me to open the share one?
Let's make sure there's no questions first.
So Kevin is asking if we can talk about timing and how long before the event should you contact the media? And definitely a good question. So there's different timing for each media outlet, print, radio, TV, and then don't forget about bloggers and internet. With print, daily and community newspapers are sort of the two avenues. Community newspapers, by and large, are weekly, so you want to go to them pretty far out in comparison to daily. It's not a bad idea to go 3 weeks out because oftentimes you don't reach them right away. And so there's a little bit of phone tag, or it takes you a couple of tries to get to the right reporter. With daily, you can kind of play the same game but maybe go 2 weeks out from your event. Again, really just leaving yourself time to find the right reporter. With television, they work so last minute that typically a week out is great, and you're really sending them the nuts and bolts of why they should care. You're not sending them a 2-page press release. It's really more or less down and dirty, the who, what, when, where, and the visual. And the visual you actually can have first. Like, what are you going to see if you cover this story? And that alone can grab the producer's attention. And you can pitch the producer. You can also pitch directly to the host and have luck that way. You can also take advantage of Facebook and Twitter and pitch reporters that way. So there's the traditional way of a phone call or an email, but you can use Facebook and Twitter and other social media to reach out to reporters. With radio, somewhat similar to TV, they're more or less last minute. So a week out to 2 weeks is pretty normal. And remember, with radio, there's the news, and they're more like TV, where if you just pitch them a week out, you're good. But then on every radio station, sometimes they have weekend shows that are more public affairs, public interest, that you want to give yourself more time. And then there's a morning show and an afternoon show. So you want to explore the radio station. Obviously, that kind of thing is very time-consuming. So be targeted and don't worry about being targeted. I think it's overwhelming. You all wear a lot of hats already. But if you have one goal, we'd really like to be on WWXY station. I'm making that up, of course. Go for it and flesh that out as much as you can and really give it your all. So I hope that answers that question.
I would just add that when Michelle says a week out, remember that's building in time to get to the right person, and particularly for TV and radio, news radio, not the shows that she was just describing, because they do need longer lead time, but a week is still pretty far in advance in the world of TV, and they really don't start to pay attention until about 2 days before your event, because they're changing their newscast by the second, depending on breaking news. They're always kind of reconfiguring what's going to make it in based on how much breaking news there is, and if there isn't much, then you're way more likely to get in with a story like this, because this is more of a feature. And don't be discouraged if you call a week out and you don't hear back. Don't be afraid to call again 2 days out. And even 2 days out, you're going to go to a different contact than you would the day of. They have a producer called the Future. Planning editor is what it's called, and that's for anything that's not the day of, because that, in the minds of TV, is the future. So the day of, you're going to go to the news desk and the news director, and that's when they really, really are paying attention to your story and making the decision. So just kind of be aware of that, even though to you it may seem last minute, to them that's the way they operate on a day-to-day basis by the second. And then the other thing I would just add is there's also another category of long leads with print, and that's the magazines that typically take a few months. And they kind of spell out their lead time for you if you can look them up in any kind of directory or call the organization. You can ask them, what's your lead time? And they may say 6 months, they may say 3 months, they may say 30 days. All the magazines are different. So you want to be cognizant of what the lead time is for a long lead magazine.
Many of you have a publication, something by the name of, we have Chicago Parent or Minneapolis Parent, or there's a parent magazine in so many cities that's a monthly publication. That's a great place that parents will look to find activities and things to do with their kids, and it's a perfect place for something like this to be mentioned. It is on our radar as a long lead pitch, but if by all means, if you've got a contact or you want to go ahead because you've got a certain story that obviously we don't know about, I say go for it. So there are a couple of other questions on the chat, so I want to just scroll through that. One person had asked, how do you format a press release? And that can be answered by the toolkit that will be sent to everyone and or made available online. So I'm not going to get to that right now. Anna, if I'm missing the mark on that one, we'll send an email out and make sure I.
And there's also a webinar on the toolkit too that would be useful.
And that's coming soon.
Yes, there is.
Go ahead.
Sorry, everyone. This is Anna just chiming in. We will have that information on press releases in our media kit. It will be available on our website soon, and it will also be the subject of a future webinar, I believe, in August.
Yep.
So please stay tuned for announcements on the date and information on that as well. And if you have anything that's more immediate, you can feel free to email me.
There was another question about how much prominence should we give to tie in the national initiative in a story about a local event. It's a little bit of a judgment call. If you feel that your local story is really strong, like a slam dunk, then I would say you don't need to tie in any national initiative. But obviously, we're giving you tools and tips and all the things that you need to be successful locally. We want you to obviously aim to include National Public Lands Day in all of your stories. There's the big overarching obesity issue and the initiative that First Lady Michelle Obama has taken on. That's a hook that we've used, and there's other national, angles that can help you pitch your story. So if your local story is strong and you don't need it, don't worry about trying to get some national hook. If you feel like your local story might not have enough zip to it, then definitely tying in the national initiative, like the obesity epidemic, I think they're calling it, to say, to make the point of how important it is for people to get out and move, and what a great example parents are setting when they are involved in events like this.
I think by nature, the description and the definition of National Public Lands Day is that it's national, and at the very least, you're going to want an about us. We call it a boilerplate. So, what is National Public Lands Day? And sometimes that's just kind of used as filler at the bottom of the press release. It's the boilerplate information with a website. And I think at the very minimum, if you don't think that you need it and you want to play it down a little bit, the very minimum you would want to include that so that reporters know what National Public Lands Day is, and by definition.
That you're part of a bigger initiative, that it's not just your event, but this is happening all over the country. And I know the boilerplate, as we're calling it, that'll be in the toolkit as well, so you'll be able to access that. There's a question about – go ahead.
You'll also see in the examples that we give you today, the boilerplate, you'll see a press release, so you'll kind of see the parts of a press release. And just per Kevin's question about timing, you're also going to see a specific news angle that had kind of its own timing, which I'll go through when we go through those examples.
So there's a question about timeline for getting brochures and flyers out to area businesses. So if you've got an event happening and you want people to know about it, there are a lot of different ways to do that. In addition to the media outreach, if you've got stacks of flyers and you want to leave them at the public library or local community centers, you can be the judge of how many you leave at these places. But I would get them out, 6 weeks out from the day, because people are in and out of those places through the summer. It's a great chance to give people a heads up that something they might be interested is coming their way. And typically businesses are happy to support these kinds of efforts. So, 6 to 8 weeks is probably pretty good. We don't, at this point, have other questions in the chat, but if anyone has questions as we continue, please, again, include them in the chat. Carissa, should we pull up the share one?
Yeah. Good timing. Okay, so this will be available to you online after our presentation, along with a recording of this webinar. But what this is here is an example of a personal story from another client of ours, which is Lions Clubs International. We work with the Lions Clubs international headquarters, and then all of the individual clubs around the country and around the world. So not unlike, how the way we work with NEAF and National Public Lands Day with each of the local events happening around the country, we are always kind of hearing personal stories from different volunteers that are part of the Lions Clubs. And this is a story about a volunteer who traveled to Africa to help dig a well in Mali and had an amazing experience, as you might imagine, and is kind of sort of running through a typical day in an email to me because, like I was describing before, what you really want to do with your volunteers is just kind of interview them, pre-interview them the way a reporter would. And that can happen via email or on the phone, and kind of hear what they have to say. And then after you've taken notes, take a step back and look at the mediability, which is what we've gone over today, of their story, and think about how you might be able to turn that into a media opportunity and, a press release that would go along with it. At the bottom of this email, here are kind of the mediability points. He was doing this perfectly timed around Earth Day, and so because Earth Day is, a kind of a earmarked day that media cover every year, and this was more of an environmental story because it was about digging a well and providing water, which is one of our most precious resources. We really hooked on to the Earth Day angle and went to local media in his hometown and in Chicago, which is where Lions Club is headquartered, and we pitched it as an Earth Day story. The local angle for him was that he was born and raised in Ocean City, and the fact that he had volunteered for years growing up in Ocean City, part of the Ocean City Lions Club, and his father had before him, gave him really that personal story that we went to the Ocean City media with. So we went to Chicago media because the organization was based there. We went to Ocean City media because he was from there, even though he didn't live there anymore, but he grew up there. And we used that Earth Day hook with both because obviously every reporter, every media outlet covers Earth Day, no matter where they are. So in the hometown, he was the local volunteer. And then as far as being accessible, with this particular story, that was obviously key because he was in Africa, so it would be very difficult if he wasn't accessible and willing to work with media just because of the time difference alone. It would basically, it would be impossible for media without us and without his willingness to work with us to then work with reporters. It would not have been possible to do the media that we did. So he was very accessible via email and phone, both from Africa and then when he returned, he was exhausted when he returned, and he did media interviews before he even went to sleep. So that's kind of a good example of the kind of spokesperson that makes your job easier. And then on the next page, Michelle, is the press release that kind of goes along with this story. So you can take time to read this.
The share two?
No, it's the second page of this document, share one. I don't know if you know how to get to that. I can't really scroll down.
Oh, I see it. Sorry.
Okay.
Oh, you know what? No, it's not. It doesn't seem to be popping up. Here we go.
There it is. Yeah.
Sorry, everyone.
So you can kind of see here, this is the format of a press release, and we will get into this in August at the webinar, but right up in the headline you'll see local volunteer. That tells reporters right away that this is a local volunteer. Then it mentions Earth Day in the second headline. So celebrates Earth Day. That's your timely news hook. And then in the third line, in the headline, it talks about those visuals that I was saying, the photos, the B-roll. B-roll is video. The B, it comes from beta, because media still use the beta tapes, beta format. So B-roll, photos of the drilling, and then the accessibility is right there too. So interviews available. So media know when they look at nothing more than the headline, they know they have a local volunteer, they have a timely news hook with Earth Day, and they have a visual, and they have an accessible spokesperson. So not only is the spokesperson local, but they're available, because it doesn't help them if they're not and they can't talk to them. So those are kind of the key pieces right there to having a story that will translate into a media opportunity. And you don't need to read any further, than just these headlines. But if you want to, if you want to take the time later to kind of compare his email with the press release, you'll see kind of, we incorporated a quote from him. We talked about his background, as a volunteer for Lions Club. So we tied in the Lions Club, the organization, which is also in that second headline. So you have the tie into the organization right there too. And then at the very end, you have his organization's boilerplate. So Lions Clubs International is the largest service club organization, and on and on and on. And it gives kind of that background information with the website, the homepage for Lions Clubs .org. So for National Public Lands Day, that would then be your boilerplate would be about National Public Lands Day, and would give the website and the background of what the initiative is.
And just to point out, at the very bottom, which hopefully everyone can see on the screen, the last paragraph is the boilerplate, and it's just what Lions Club is and what they do. So hopefully this answers the question about formatting the press release. For many of the events that you do, you may not need a full press release like this. You may just need an advisory, which is who, what, when, where, the nuts and bolts, and it's set up differently. And again, those examples will be on the website, and we'll be having a webinar about the tools, and the advisory is one of them. Are we ready to go to share 2?
I just would point out the last thing, which is that human interest angle, and kind of the piece that readers can grasp onto because they can relate to it. And that's really coming through in that second paragraph where we're quoting the spokesperson saying most people never consider the water coming out of your faucet may not be clean and it could make you sick. People in the U.S. don't have to worry about that, but there are millions of people all over the world that do. And that's kind of the way to kind of really drive home the message by sort of relating it to the reader, who may stop to think then, wow, I never have considered that when I turned on my faucet. I'm really lucky. And that's the kind of thing that reporters look for, because they know that that's a more engaging article if the reader really kind of stops to think about their own personal experience. Any questions before we move on about this one?
Okay, so far no more questions, so we'll move on. And we're being super mindful of the time. We've got a few more minutes. So we'll talk about this second attachment, and I invite anyone to share in the chat any final questions.
Okay, so here are 2 inspiring National Public Lands Day stories, and they both have different elements that make them media friendly. The first one is a write-up from someone in Utah who started the very first National Public Land Day in her area, and she kind of talks about how, from her perspective, how she came up with the idea. And she was a runner who was thinking about the upcoming marathon, which was taking place on October 13th, and she took a look at the trails, and they were not fit for runners to be running on them for the marathon. So she was thinking of something completely different. And that is unique because it kind of brings the National Public Land Day story to a new audience. It ties in now through her story. It can tie in with the marathon, with running, with being active and fit, and those reporters that cover those subjects. And we all know marathons get covered locally every year. Now have kind of a fresh angle to cover. It's not just about the runners, but it's about the trails that they're running on and who is taking care of those trails and how does that happen. It doesn't just happen magically. It happens through National Public Lands Day, this amazing national initiative that's happening all over the country. So that local angle for this one with a local park, a local marathon, and local volunteers really kind of bring it home for reporters. The specific target audience is runners and fitness reporters would be interested in covering this, along with the typical reporter, an environmental reporter. This just kind of gives you one more area of the newsroom that you can go to. And then the timely news hook here is perfect. With the marathon coming up on October 13th, it is perfect timing for coverage of National Public Land Day because people are starting to think about the marathon. It's a couple weeks away. And then the visual and the sound for this one, if you were to make this a media opportunity, you would want photos or video of runners. And if you don't have that readily available, you then would just give the reporter, if this is a TV reporter, give them access to it. So you might have some volunteers out there, volunteering but also running, so they can shoot that B-roll that they need to put the story together. The second one is it's an account from a site manager who was then kind of talking about a comment that he heard from a student who just basically said, "Wow, I didn't realize that I like to garden. Now I know I do. I can't wait to show my family." And this is a good example of a specific target audience. It's a youth audience. It's also education in schools because it's a high school volunteer, and media typically cover schools. And then gardening. It's a high school student who decided they liked gardening through National Public Lands Day. So there are gardening sections of the newspaper who might be those reporters might be interested in how children can become interested in gardening. And this is just an example of a local program with local schools and local volunteers. And then the news hook here, you could time this around back to school. National Public Lands Day it happens right in the fall, and it's right when students are getting back to school. So there may be classes through the school that are learning about gardening and the environment, and this fits right in perfectly with a story that hooks into that. The visual and the sound, again, would be shots or sounds of the students talking about it, students learning about it in class, and then students volunteering, of course, on National Public Lands Day. Okay, any other questions?
So earlier in the chat, I gave my email address, and I'm just double checking to make sure that was sent to everyone. If not, I will make that known. And that's all we have for this session. If anyone has questions or you're not sure if your story has what it takes to go to the media, or you're not sure what reporter to go to, feel free to reach out.
I would just add that the best way we can help you would be if you do have a summary, much like these. It can just be a paragraph or two. If you can email that to Michelle, and feel free to email me as well, we'll take a look at your summary, and we will definitely help work through what you need and what you may or may not have to go to the media.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope this was a good use of your time, and stay tuned for the next webinar. I think we have a couple more coming, and one of those will definitely be the toolkit, which will answer some of these other questions about formatting the press release, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you again, everyone. Oh, someone's asking for my email. I'm going to put it in the chat to everyone.
And then, Michelle, you can go ahead and include mine, too.